here. Is it not a problem?
Are we good? Are we good?
Good.
Electronically and everything?
I apologize.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Collins joining virtually. Dr. Dixon in Las Vegas.
Here. Chelsea.
Senator Doniate joining virtually. Ms. Flores O'Toole joining virtually.
Here. Okay.
Attorney General Ford.
Here.
Senator Ganser joining virtually. Ms. Holmes in Carson City. I'm here. Mr. Iverson joining virtually. Ms. Johnson joining virtually.
Present. Good morning.
Ms. Lee joining virtually.
Good morning, present.
Ms. Nadler joining virtually. Ms. Payson joining virtually.
Present.
Mr. Schoen in Carson City.
Good morning, I'm here.
Mr. Shell joining virtually.
Good morning, I'm here.
Assemblywoman Thomas in Las Vegas.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles in Carson City.
Present.
And Dr. Woodard joining virtually.
Present.
Mr. Attorney General, we have a quorum.
Very well. Well, again, welcome everybody. Good to see everyone. We will move on to the next agenda item, which is public comment. Do we have anyone here in Vegas for public comment? Do we have anyone in Carson or Reno for public comment?
We do not.
Do we have anyone on the broadcast for public comment?
I believe we do. We have a Linda Lang who has her hand raised.
Ms. Lang, you're recognized. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Attorney General Ford. For the record, my name is Linda Lang, and I am with the Nevada Statewide Coalition Partnership. And my public comment this morning is really just a thank you to the SURG Prevention Subcommittee for allowing the coalitions to provide a list of strategies and to present at their last meeting on some things that are very, very important to the field of prevention. It was much appreciated. I thought it was a great conversation. And as we move forward, I hope that those conversations are taken into consideration. But really, this is just a thank you.
Well, thank you. We like thank yous. Appreciate that. Thank you so much for your public comment. Do we have anyone else?
Yes, we have one more, Kimberly Sarandos.
Kimberly Sarandos. Go ahead, you're recognized.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, my name is Kimberly Sarandos. I am the program manager for Join Together Northern Nevada, the coalition that serves Washoe County. Thank you for your consideration of prevention efforts in Nevada and for your recognition of the outstanding work of the prevention coalitions in our state. I am here today to emphasize and recognize the importance of adverse childhood experiences to prevention work in the state of Nevada and particularly to Washoe County. The 2019 YRBS ACEs special report suggests that the prevalence of each of the measured ACEs among high school students in Washoe County are higher or similar to the state overall, with the exception of the high school students who have ever seen or heard adults in their homes slap, kick, punch, or beat each other up, which is considerably higher for Nevada. 34.7% of high school students ever lived with someone who is depressed, mentally ill, or suicidal, and 32.2% of high school students ever lived with someone who is a problem drinker, alcoholic, or has abused street or prescription drugs. Both metrics are higher than Nevada. The state of Nevada ranks higher in ACEs than the national average in almost every category, and we believe that prevention is tied directly to the mitigation of these traumatic experiences. We embed trauma-informed instruction in our activities and are sensitive to stigma in our work. Coalitions work in the trenches with students and families in our communities and know, through data and anecdotal experiences, that family bonds, meaningful conversations, sense of community, and evidence-based programming are key to lifting our children up and helping them to live a successful, holistic life. Pediatrician Nadine Burke-Harris engaged in a TED Talk about trauma and pediatric disorders such as ADD, ADHD, obesity, etc. regarding ACEs data. And then she encapsulates prevention perfectly. She says, one of the things they teach you in public health school is that if you are a doctor and you see 100 kids drinking from the same well and 98% develop a sickness, you can go ahead and write a prescription for dose after dose of antibiotics. You can walk over to the well and say, what in the world is in this water? Prevention coalitions in Nevada look into the well on a daily basis and we ask ourselves, what's in this water? And how do we help from the source? I know that when my staff makes a connection with a child, or JTNN provides training to counselors or ACEs strategies, or we have a conversation with a parent who is at their wit's end, we are crawling into the hole and we are reaching for traumatized people to help them out at the very beginning of the continuum of care. I can say with a certainty that trauma-informed services and ACEs mitigation are a hand out of the darkness. Prevention coalitions in Nevada and our many community partners engage in structured, meaningful, data-driven work that provides a hand out of the darkness and increases community capacity to be the hand for all walks of life. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. All right. Very good. Do we have anyone else for public comment?
No, sir.
Okay, last call, public comment. Anyone else? Very well. We'll move on to the next agenda, item number 3, which is review and approval of the minutes from our March 9th, 2022 SURG meeting. They've been distributed for your review. Please take a couple seconds or minutes and I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move to approve.
All right, I appreciate you.
Dixon.
Dr. Dixon has moved to approve. Do I have a second?
Gina
Second.
Flores O'Toole.
Second. Very good. I have a motion and a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion on this motion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. Moving on to agenda item number 4, we're going to receive an update on our opioid litigation, settlement funds and the distribution. My trusted assistant, well, it says second assistant attorney general. That is not accurate on the agenda. We should fix that. But he is my chief of the Consumer Protection Division. Mark Kruger is here to talk to us a little bit about the litigation, again, settlement funds and distribution. With that, Mr. Kruger, mic's yours.
Thank you, Attorney General. I thank you all for having me here today, and I'm pleased to present, thanks for bringing up that screen too, pleased to present an update on the opioid settlements. And if you guys have questions, please feel free to jump right in. I'll also be available afterwards or in between on breaks if there's specific questions about some of the presentation. So can we go to the next slide? That works, good. Okay, so I thought I'd outline for you what I'm going to go over today, and I'll try to keep it brief, mindful of your time. But basically, I'm going to go over the status of the settlements and anticipated recoveries, the status of the costs and the Medicaid One Nevada Agreement on Opioid Recoveries, the Resilient Fund for Nevada, SB 390, the State Needs Assessment and State Plan. I don't go into details on that, just the fact that there's a requirement. The local government's needs assessments and plans, calculation chart and allocation amounts and timeline, and then anticipated allocation disbursements. So I know we're going to cover a lot, but please, again, feel free to jump in. Next slide.
Let me jump in real quickly and say thank you, Mark. This is a timely conversation. I'm certain that many of you have seen a couple of newspaper articles that have come out relative to the litigation and opioids. And I think it's important that we have this discussion in an open way and open to any questions, concerns, complaints that we have regarding this. And so thank you so much again for presenting the time of conversation. Mark, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Okay, and So basically, as Attorney General Ford said, we've had a lot of movement in this area, and recently we announced settlements with Johnson & Johnson and a separate settlement with 3 big distributors. That would be McKesson, Cardinal Health, and AmerisourceBergen. The Johnson & Johnson settlement is a total amount of $53 million and change, and I put it on this slide. The distributor settlement is $231 million. That gives you a total of both settlements of $285 million that we're going to see coming in. And all of this, for the most part, must go to abating the epidemic that we are facing and that you guys are working so well on, developing a plan to attack. So let's go to the next slide. So in Johnson & Johnson, there was an initial payment that we have received of $50 million. There will be a subsequent second payment in April of 2025, which is the remainder, almost a little over $2.5 million. Next slide, please. So the distributor settlement, unlike Johnson & Johnson, which we get the bulk of it up front, the distributor settlement is going to be paid out over 18 payments. That actually doesn't work out to 18 years. It's a little bit less because 2 of the payments are going to be coming in earlier. So the payments are not equal. They are close to equal, but they all come in about around the July timeframe after we get to July 2023. Up front, we should be getting the first payment sometime in June, hopefully around the 15th, maybe towards the end, and the second payment in July of 2022. So the first 2 payments are going to total $20,298,000. Now, next slide, please. All right, we being the state of Nevada has entered into a One Nevada agreement on allocation of opioid recoveries. What that agreement does is it took all of the litigating cities and all of the counties, whether they're litigating or not, and developed an agreement to allocate any recoveries through settlements or through bankruptcy. Remember, there are a couple of bankruptcies that are still being wrapped up. The reason and the importance of this is that, like fire, opioids and the epidemic do not care about county lines, state, or even city lines. So if we work together and encourage working together to fight this epidemic, we should be successful in actually making a real abatement to this issue. So the agreement, we believe, fairly and equitably allocates the recoveries of these bankruptcies and these settlements to all of these counties, as I said, and to the opioid litigating cities. The one thing it does do, and most of the settlements and bankruptcies requires it requires that the money be used for abatement purposes, which is consistent with the things that are outlined in SB 390, the programs and services. The advantages, it allows the recovery to be allocated so that the entire state can coordinate efforts, as I said, and it also has developed some opportunity for everyone to work together and ensures that the recoveries are going to be used for abatement. Next slide, please. And I think they're going to be sharing this slide deck with you after the meeting, or it will be available. Okay, local governments. Under the terms of the One Nevada Agreement, local governments must use the money for abatement. I put this slide in here because there was a specific question as to whether or not counties could use the recoveries that are allocated to counties for other purposes. And the answer is no. Emphatically, it must be used for abatement. In addition to that, we will be receiving annual reports from all the signatories to the One Nevada Agreement so that we can verify and ensure that the money is being used for the correct purpose. Next slide, please. All right. Unfortunately, the reality is that when you sue companies and any kind of litigation, there are costs associated with that. So we have removed the cost off the top and then do the allocation. We believe that in this manner, we all share in the cost, and it's a term of art in the legal world called lead litigator costs. And this is a generally accepted practice of how you would assess cost first and then do the allocation. So out of the McKinsey settlement, which was an additional settlement of $45 million, we had the initial cost. Now, that not just cost for McKinsey, it would be cost for the entire litigation to date. So the cost will actually hopefully go down because those initial costs are quite expensive, especially for discovery. The next cost, we're going to cut it off at the end of June, and those are going to be approximately 10 million. I believe they will be less than that. So we'll see some of these numbers change, which is why, as I talk, there will be some that are fixed numbers and some that are estimates. So after these costs are paid out, the distributors, and those will be paid out of the Johnson & Johnson settlement, the distributor costs will not, they won't have any cost for the distributor settlement. Any other costs will be paid out of future settlements. So the good news is there will be zero in cost for the distributor's recovery. I do want to make a note that there is an ongoing CMS Medicaid issue where there might be some reimbursement costs. That's accounted for in the One Nevada agreement. But at this time, we don't have any additional information or updates on that. And so therefore, we're going to assess that for the time being at zero.
Before you move on, I want to add to the.
Go ahead, General.
Let's go back to that. So I want to clarify a few things about this. As I've indicated, there are a couple of articles out there about our litigation, specifically McKinsey, and there's some, I believe, some confusion. I want to be very clear about this. Costs are not the same thing as attorney's fees. Okay, the costs or what is costing us to litigate this, to do discovery, as he's indicated, depositions, reviewing documents, terabytes of information on the computer. These are costs that this office would have to incur and have to go to the Board of Examiners, for example, and ask for millions upon millions of dollars because we don't have the staff in this office to be able to do the type of litigation that we're doing right now, which is the reason why we've been able to secure the services of a very reputable firm, a firm that I did not select. In fact, had nothing to do with the selection process. I want to be clear about that. I was recused from the selection process. But the point is, all of the costs that are associated with us being able to get the $45 million from McKinsey and the $50+ million from Johnson & Johnson and the $285 million from the distributors, all of those are costs that we would have had to have borne regardless. That is not attorney's fees. So I want to make that clear for purposes of the public knowledge. This is a public meeting. This is going to be reflected in the minutes. And if there are any questions around costs, please let us know so that we could clarify any questions in that regard. Later on, you'll hear about attorney's fees, which are separate, and they are not $16 million, and they will not be $10 million under the J&J settlement component that we're talking about here either. So with that, I will turn the mic back to Mark. And Mark, if I said anything inaccurate, please correct me, but that's my understanding. I've worked at law firms that have thousands of people in it, and they too have had to go outside of the law firm to hire folks to come in and do discovery, to review all of the documents and all of the data and all of the internet, terabytes of information they get as well. So this is no different from any other in this instance, billion-dollar lawsuit.
General Ford, you're absolutely correct. And, while you were talking, I thought to myself, maybe an example or two might be helpful. But there's something else very, very important as well, and that our office is working very hard to keep the costs down. And in fact, I did some checking, and our costs, even though they seem very large, and $16 million is a large number, but this is a huge case. And our costs are actually lower than some of the other states that I've looked at that are similarly situated with the number of defendants and the size of case we are. So we're actually doing a very good job. Let me give you an example. At one point in time, when we take all the information we had to collect from the state, we have to redact it under the case management order. That's the order by the court. And we have to review it by attorneys. That's basically the industry standard. So we hired 91 attorneys at one time. There is no way our office could have absorbed 91 attorneys full-time reviewing these documents and redacting them. Those 91 attorneys, you think to yourself, well, how much did you pay for them? Well, at one point in time, they were at $55 an hour, and 4 reviewers at, I believe it was $95 an hour. So you can see that we worked very well in making sure that those costs were low in order to get this this accomplished.
Yeah, when I was in private practice, I charged $400 an hour. I just want y'all to know, being a lawyer for $55 an hour, that's a steal. So.
Exactly, and that's my point. So that gives you an idea. And there are, as General Ford said, terabytes of information, which literally works out to millions and millions of pages. So that just gives you an idea and some examples of what we've done. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. So the Resilient Fund for Nevada, there were some questions about what is the Resilient Fund, where does the money go, and how does it get into the Resilient Fund, and then what's the purpose of it? So I want it to be very clear. The Resilient Fund was created by SB 390. It's the fund where the state's portion, that would be the part that's allocated to the state for state damages, is deposited after it goes through the One Nevada Agreement allocation. It's managed by the Department of Health and Human Services. They actually are the ones that are putting together the state needs assessment, state plan, which I'm going to talk about. And the fund is separate from the general fund, and it must be used only for abatement of the opioids epidemic. So that gives you what the actual Resilient Fund for Nevada is when you hear that term, when they speak about it. It's just a deposit fund where we put the money so that it can fund the programs and services that come out of the state plan and state needs assessment. I'm going to talk about those. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So the state needs assessment and state plan are also a product of SB 390. And they require Department of Health and Human Services to create a needs assessment. Now, when we talk about a needs assessment, the state needs assessment says, look, the state recognizes that there are programs and services throughout the entire geographic area of the state that are needed to be able to abate the opioids epidemic. It identifies everything in that realm that could possibly be used to abate the opioids epidemic. However, they don't have enough money to fund all of those services and programs, at least not yet, that could be used. So we have to prioritize those. The state plan is what prioritizes the programs and services that are identified in the needs assessment so that we can start effectively abating this epidemic. The state needs assessment and correspondingly the state plan are required to be updated every 3 years so that as things change, because the programs and services are hopefully going to work, then there may be some, hey, look, this one's really working, this one's not as much, let's switch money to over here to the ones that are effectively working. Any questions on that from anybody?
At some point, we're going to get an update on the state plan, right? I know that we were supposed to be getting the needs assessment out maybe last month or this month, and we'll hear about that later on. I'm seeing some nods, but is that a yes, Terry? Okay, very good.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so then there was a question as to whether or not local governments must do or can do needs assessments and plans. So SB 390 actually envisioned that counties may very well want to do county needs assessments and county plans. In this manner, they can work together with the state, and they can also work together with the cities and local governments in their counties. They do not have to do a county assessment, but if they do, what we recognized and what SB 390 recognized was that they probably don't have the expertise in-house to be able to develop a county needs assessment or county plan that would mirror or be similar in modeling to the state. However, the state Department of Health and Human Services does have that expertise. And so what SB 390 does is it requires DHHS to provide some assistance and guidance to counties. Fortunately, the counties all, or most, I believe all of them, but if not most of them, work through NACO, the Nevada Association of Counties. And NACO has agreed to be the point of contact between the counties, especially their health departments, and the Department of Health and Human Services to coordinate efforts to develop county needs assessments where counties want to develop needs assessments. All right. And then, of course, then the counties would develop a plan, just like the state's developing a plan to fund their county needs assessments. Next slide, please.
Mark, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I did have a question.
Okay, perfect.
Reference the counties. How are funds distributed to local government entities
You mean like physically?
physically?
That's on me. So, I'm going to get to that. If you can hold that question, and I will answer that question.
For the record, that was Senator Thomas who asked that question.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mark, one other question.
Yes.
Is there a timeline for when these county needs assessments and plans need to be done? And also the report to the AG on how they use the funds?
Yeah, the reports, I believe, from the best of my recollection, I believe that's on an annual basis after the funds get involved. They annually have to report. The timeline for the county needs assessment, there isn't a timeline. However, because the state is putting together their needs assessment now and should have it done by, I believe, and Dr. Woodard's on here, she may be able to correct me at the exact timeline, but I believe it's by sometime in the end of June. So early July, that should be done. And then they will have the plan done shortly after that. It would be great to have local governments kind of do the same thing at the same time frame so that when they get their money, which I'm going to talk about when they're just dispersed, they could then act upon those county needs assessments and then, I guess, activate them right then and there. So that's kind of the time frame that the Department of Health and Human Services is coordinating with the counties. But let's say someone doesn't want to do a needs assessment yet, they've decided to wait another few months, they could do that. There's no time limit on it. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to go over the actual amounts that we're going to be looking at being deposited. So some of these are actual amounts that have been deposited and some are amounts that are estimated. The total actual amount that has been deposited into the state fund for Resilient Nevada, which we talked about, from the McKinsey settlement was 28 million and a little bit more than 28 million. Okay. Now, there were some fees that had to be taken out of that, but we had agreed with the outside law firm to defer those at the time. The reason is we wanted to fund that fund with as much as we could so that we could get started on developing the needs assessment and the state plan. So that money's in there already. With the first payment of Johnson & Johnson.
Let me stop you for a second. Mm-hmm. So the McKinsey settlement was agreed to for $45 million. We have a contract with the firm that, and this is every firm would do this, that before we receive monies from the settlement, costs come out first. That's correct. That's by contract. Okay. And that's everyday practice and everything in any law firm. And it would have been our practice because we would have had to go to, again, Board of Examiners to get 91 attorneys or whatever the case may be, right? So there's nothing untoward in my estimation relative to that money first having to go pay off the costs that were associated with us being able to commence the litigation that is not just related to McKinsey, but to the entirety of what we're doing. So I want to ensure everyone at least hears that part, and if you have additional questions about that, do so. Feel free to speak up on that, but that's what happened here, and I want to be certain people understood that. The $5 million here, that's attorney's fees, and they were not given out. We agreed with the law firm that they would not take attorney's fees from the first settlement that we got because we wanted as much money as possible to be able to go toward addressing the problem as early as possible. So I think it bears repeating that as well for purposes of this conversation.
That's correct. Okay, so the second payment, then we have to incorporate those fees. So the first J&J payment, the amount that's estimated to go in, because remember, we still have the cost that General Ford was talking about. That would be the $10 million, which I believe is going to be around, I don't know, anywhere between 7 and 10. So that amount will adjust a little bit, hopefully up from $9 million. Then the distributor's payment. Now remember, with the distributor's payment, there are no costs that are coming out, but there are still fees. And I'm going to show you a chart. So those amounts are, the first payment will be $3.5 million, and then a little over $3.5 million for the second payment. So the total estimated initial deposits to the Resilient Fund effective July 2022 would be $44 $772,121.14. Now remember, that's going to be slightly adjusted up because of the cost when they're finally calculated at the end of June. All right, next slide, please.
We have a question here in Carson, I think.
Oh, great. Yes.
Thank you so much. Jill Tolles for the record. And I appreciate this. You're anticipating the questions that we would ask in regards to what is the final, net amount that's going to be deposited after fees and costs. So I just want to make sure I'm following along correctly. From the distributors, the first payment and second payment in June and July of 2022 was estimated to be roughly 22 million out of the total settlement of 231.7 roughly million that will be paid out in 18 payments. So if I'm doing some rough math here, the 3.5 million that's going to be distributed in the first payment and the 3.7 million roughly that's going to be distributed in the second payment means that if we were anticipating 22 million, that there's 15 million in fees that was deducted out of those first two payments. Am I doing that math correctly? So in summary, the whole settlement from the distributors is roughly 231 million. The first two payments were estimated to be 22 million, but we're only actually seeing 3.5 and 3.7 million coming through after fees and costs, which means that we're paying out about 15 million in fees and costs for the distributors.
Someone told, hold on 1 second, I'm going to answer your question. Can you go to the next slide, please? I'm sorry, one more slide. One more forward, please. Yeah, there you go. Okay, here's the chart. And I think this will answer your questions. So as you can see, and this starts with the first payment of J&J on the first top part, and you can see that there's an estimated amount there of cost, $10 million. Remember, that's cost, like Attorney General Ford has talked about a couple times here, and those are hard costs, actual money we actually had to pay in order to move the litigation forward. Then the estimated total amount to be allocated, then the attorney's fees that come out of that, and then the estimated allocation after fees. Okay, so when we get down to the second part, we're not talking about costs anymore. We don't have any hard costs come out, so we just have fees. So you can see the actual amounts, the distributors, and this is the entire dollar amount. So you can see on the totals on the bottom, 285,188,000, just like we talked about. So when you see them come out, you can see the payments that when they're expected, and the amount that should be paid, which would be as you can see, 8 million, 8 million, 10 million, 2 million. So as you go down.
Does that help us, Assemblywoman?
I think so. So in May and July, for the distributors, I see we have the share, no costs, but the fees only add up to 1.6 and 1.7, if I'm reading that correctly, under the distributors' fees. So that's only roughly 3 million. I'm trying to find where the other than 12 million went for the distributors piece. That brought us down from 22 million that we were anticipating and getting in June and July, but only ended up netting out to 7 million. So I see that 3 million is accounted for in fees. How much is costs, and is that because we're doing it all up front, or are we going to continue to see those larger chunks coming out of each payment in additional 16? And maybe we can just map it out in detail.
Someone told you bring up a great point, and I have another chart. So we have to remember, we're looking at this as totals. So it's the total dollar amount coming in. Then we have another chart which looks at how much the state is allocated when we put the money through the One Nevada agreement. Because remember, there is an allocation to all of the counties and the state. And remember, we needed the counties and the cities and the state to work together to accept these settlements, because the settlements were tiered on the number of counties and cities that were going to be in, that gave you the maximum dollar. So this is the maximum we could get under the settlement. But if we wouldn't have had certain counties and cities, that dollar amount would have went down. So the One Nevada agreement allowed us, everyone, all the signatories, to actually enter into the settlement and get the maximum dollar amount. And so the allocation agreement allocates that money then further. So anybody have a question?
Yeah, no, and so, Assemblywoman, I just kind of want to reiterate something I've said already, which is, if you serve on IFC, you would have seen me come to you and ask you for millions of dollars to prosecute this lawsuit or to litigate this lawsuit. And so the net effect would have been you would have given me, I'm just gonna make up a number, $10 million to do what I needed to do in order to bring in the $50 million, which would have only been a net of $40 million at the end of the day anyway, right? And it's the exact same scenario here where we've been able to contract with outside counsel to expend that money that I didn't have to ask you for to spend. So it's not as though there's a windfall going elsewhere. It is, we are having to spend money to make money. I hate to use that phraseology, but that's essentially what's happening here. On the costs side of things, all of the costs are things that the state would have had to pay for, irrespective of outside counsel. The fees themselves at 1.6 million, for example, you see for the distributors in May, that's a fee, to be sure, money that we would not have spent had we not hired outside counsel. But the costs of $10 million are monies we would have spent irrespective of outside counsel. So I just want to be certain that that's clear so folks understand that it's not like we're losing out on money. It's that we had to spend that money in the first place in order to be able to be in a position to settle for the amounts that we've settled for. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I guess I can take some more of my questions, just spend a little bit more time with these charts to understand how much we can anticipate. We've got 16 more payments coming in from the distributors. This is obviously our largest settlement, 231 million. So I'd love to understand, are we going to see this pattern continue where we only actually deposit about a third of what those payments are allocated for? Or did we just do a lot of costs and fees up front in these first initial payments? And we'll see us keep more of that settlement dollar to be distributed into these funds. And so I'll just have to spend a little bit more time on this chart to understand, unless you can answer briefly, was this a big, because right now we're only depositing a third of what was distributed in those first two payments. Yeah. And so is that going to continue to be that track, or are we going to start seeing that reverse where we get more of the actual dollars going in?
So, Assemblywoman, my experience, I've been practicing law for 20 years and I've been in private practice for most of that time. And my experience for all litigation is that you have more costs up front. You're gearing up, you're going through discovery, you're doing depositions, you're reviewing documents, and there are a lot of costs associated with ramping up a piece of litigation. Those costs will be done and over with, and they will transition, if you will, to new types of costs. Experts, for example, that we're going to have to hire to review data. Experts who will be testifying, for example, and those costs I don't anticipate and have not experienced in 20 years that they are as astronomical as at the outset. So no, I don't think it's a fair assessment to say that you will only be receiving a third of the monies because a lot of it is going toward costs. Those costs will wane over the course of any litigation, and that includes this litigation. It's just that at the very front, on the front end of litigation, you have a lot more costs. And as a matter of general practice, those costs have to be reimbursed before any distributions can be made to the client, which is us in this case.
So if you don't mind going forward 2 slides, please. So this is actually the slide that represents, I think, more accurately the answers to your questions. And I'm available to speak about this anytime that if you have additional questions. But this slide actually shows after we go through the One Nevada agreement. Now remember, One Nevada agreement gives 43.86% of each recovery after costs are removed goes to the state. Then there's a group of money or a percentage of money that then gets allocated to the counties and the cities per the agreement. The agreement can be a little bit complicated, but it's on our website and it's all under our opioid, fighting the opioids epidemic, and I can share it with you as well and also answer questions about it. So this gross allocation, when we talk about gross allocation here for the state of Nevada dollars, out of the, let's just take the second one there, the distributors, because there's no cost there, right? The gross allocation is $4,340,895.24. The fees then come out of that. Our fees are at 19%. Now you have to remember that most of the counties and most of the signatories' fees are around 25%. So we're at 19. So we're already under what most of the other local governments engaged with council at. However, the Judge Polster, who is the MDL judge out of the Eastern District of Ohio, ordered that as part of this settlement, and he has no authority over states, so he can only order over local governments, ordered that those fees be capped at 15% for these settlements only. And then there's the additional dollar amounts that were given to private litigation, for example, and things like that out of the settlements. So the states, all of the states collectively, got a certain percentage of the settlements, the $26 billion. And then we then had an allocation agreement. And ours is probably one of the ones, the only most robust one. There are some other states now that have settlement agreements, intrastate allocation agreements with all of their local governments. But we got ours done early, and from my review of it, I think it's an extremely fair allocation agreement. This allocation agreement then gives us 43.86%. That's represented in this chart as the gross allocation to the state. And I say the state is in, that's what's going to the resilient fund, right? Less the fees, so the net allocation into the resilient fund. You'll see out of the distributors and the initial J&J will end up being $97 million. And that should give the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the committees like this one that are advising them on how to develop the state needs assessment and state plan, some idea of what they can expect in funding, at least now, over the next few years, so that they can properly fund programs and services that will be most effective in abating the epidemic. Now, I will say there is one little caveat to that, and that they do have under SB 390 that did permit an 8% administrative amount that can be used for managing the fund. I don't know that it necessarily will be that high. Like everything, the initial costs may be a little bit higher, but once the fund is starting to be used and the needs assessments develop, they'll probably likely go down. So that's the only caveat to that. Does that help with someone?
Yes, Jill Tolles, for the record, that's supremely helpful. 22,000 out of 120,000 in total is much more reasonable than, as I was calculating it, 2/3 going to fees and costs. So I'm not sure where that disconnect was in the earlier slide, but that gives me a great deal more comfort. So thank you. And I appreciate apologies to the SURG working group as a whole for spending this much time, but I think that it is really important when we're talking about these large settlements and this amount of funding that we, for the sake of our committee as well as for the public to understand that breakdown. And Chair Ford, I appreciate all your comments on the costs versus the fees and your experience there. But so thank you for that. And thanks for giving that extra time to make sure we got that abundantly clear.
Yeah, and Senatorwoman, no apology is necessary. That's what this meeting is for. This is a very important issue. I mean, we are, I think, breaking ground on something that has heretofore not been done before. That One Nevada agreement, I can't express to you enough how big of a deal that was to get Mark Kruger, my guy, in there working with every county and municipality in the state to get them to agree to an allocation model that gives us about 45% of any settlement funds that comes in, 45%, right, Mark?
44, yeah.
44%, and then the other goes to the other municipalities. That's a coup of all coups. And other states have been asking us for guidance on how they can do what we have done here. Okay, and then I also just kind of need to give kudos to the decision. When I first got here, I asked Mark and his team, what do we need to do in order to be able to win this case? And he said, we need help. And we got help. And that help enabled us to, you may not know this, but the McKinsey settlement, the original allocation we would have gotten under the McKinsey settlement was $6.5 million out of $500 million. They were going to give us $6.5 million. And I was the only attorney general of every state and territory that said no. Everybody else said yes. They took their percentage according to the allocation model. And I said, no, I can't go home to Nevada and bring home $6 million. And instead, we negotiated separately and got $45 million. And that's because we were able to have competent outside counsel to help us gear up this case and let them know how serious we were about this. Now, again, there are a lot of questions, and that's fine. I hear it. I get it. I've been on both sides of the V, both as a plaintiff's lawyer and as a defense lawyer. And I work for the government, and I've been in the room like you have, Assemblywoman, having to answer these questions and ask these questions. And I'm perfectly fine with them coming out. But I stand behind the work that this office has done and the work that Chief Kruger has been able to accomplish with outside counsel bringing in over $320 million for opioid settlements over the course of time. Okay. And that's just in the 3.5 years that I've been in this office. So I just kind of want to continue to reiterate that and let you know that we will continue to work as hard as we can to bring that money in for the second component of this, which is also unprecedented, which is that this money is only going toward abatement of opioid issues. It's not going to the highway fund. It's not going to the general fund, so Assemblywoman Thomas can figure out ways to spend it elsewhere, right? It's going to abate opioid issues. And that, again, is something that we've been able to require through these settlements. And so proud of the work. And I wanted Mark to come in and talk about the monetary issues because we're in a season where people have questions and they can ask those questions and we have great answers for them. And so thank you for asking those, Assemblywoman Toles, and keep it up. If you have any other questions, we have nothing to hide and we're willing to answer them. So we have a question here, Doctor. Go ahead.
Dr. Dixon, for the record, now that we're getting straight on the state part, what's happening? What kind of oversight is being done in these counties and local governments of anything like this?
Yeah. So I think Mark had touched on it briefly, which is they have likewise the ability to create their needs assessment plans. And they can work, and they are working with the state to do comparably, their state plans, right? And I won't speak in the right verbiage on it. There are others here who are better equipped, maybe even Dr. Kearns, to speak on that. But in terms of accountability, we're not, as a state, kind of the ones holding them accountable per se. But there are, I would imagine, checks and balances at the county level and at the municipal level to ensure that they are trying to utilize these funds from a needs assessment perspective in an appropriate fashion. Did I speak out of turn, either Dr. Kearns or Mark?
You did in general, although I can add some supplemental information as well. Don't forget, the One Nevada Agreement has a reporting requirement. All of the signatories, which includes all the counties and all the recipients to the allocation that get money, have to every year, and I double checked the agreement, every year provide a report to ensure that they are utilizing that money. Remember, it isn't just the One Nevada Agreement that's keeping them accountable. That money has to be used pursuant to the underlying settlement agreement for abatement purposes. So they could be in violation of the terms of the settlement, which could cause us a lot of problems in the courts. So that's why we have the reporting requirement. That's why we're double checking. So there is some accountability all the way through.
So I still don't have the answer to who is who. I mean, what group or whatever group, say for Clark County, is responsible for, since I work in Clark County.
Using the funds, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where we went back to the NACO and the Department of Health and Human Services working through NACO with each of the counties. Now, it's different in every county, and I think that this will start getting out of my realm of expertise and more into the realm of Dr. Woodard, who's with the Department of Health and Human Services and online. It's my understanding that some counties have actually a health department. And when you get out into the rurals, they don't necessarily have an established health department, but they do have like a point of contact at the county that's going to be helping to manage the funds. And we're encouraging, and Department of Health and Human Services is encouraging local governments, especially the rural counties and the smaller cities, to work together, collaborate, and develop programs and services that geographically work well for them, and then fund them with all of their money. So that's how they're trying to do it. And for the first time, we're really seeing a lot of collaboration between local governments and the state, and it's really, really a very nice thing to see. So, and I think Dr. Woodard can probably talk a little bit more on that. Does that answer your question?
As much as you probably can.
Okay.
We have a question from Lisa Lee.
Okay.
Ms. Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa Lee, for the record. Given the millions of people who have been affected personally, many of whom have lost their lives, as we keep seeing in the death data, so thinking about victims, and then I'm not sure if anyone in this body listened to the victim impact statements during the bankruptcy hearing, but listening to several hours of testimony from folks who've lost so much, who've lost loved ones and years of their lives in this opioid crisis. What I haven't seen is a whole lot of discussion around allocations for victims of this opioid crisis, and I'm just wondering if anyone has an answer for that. Thank you.
Lisa, Ms. Lee, I appreciate the question, and I think others on this committee have asked a similar question relative to monies directly to victims. What I would say is this is that's not the purview of this office, the Office of Attorney General, who is pursuing this litigation. We're going to bring home the bacon, and we're going to put it in the hands of the Resilient Committee, and they're going to determine how to spend the money. This committee, SURG, I suspect, could make a recommendation that they consider monies to victims, but it is not within the purview of the Attorney General's office to say this money is going to be going to a specific victim for a specific amount. This is not like the typical class action lawsuit that my old law firm would have either prosecuted or defended. This is a state action that is bringing home money to the state, and the state will be making a determination how to spend that. So that question is better presented, frankly, to the Committee for Resilient Nevada to ascertain whether they intend to allocate monies toward victims. In my estimation, they probably won't, because this is more of a state service issue where they're looking at social services costs. They're looking at foster care costs. They're looking at health costs and looking to allocate monies that way to help out. That said, I think that question is better presented to them, and maybe a recommendation from this committee to have them consider that is appropriate. And I hope that answers your question and others who've asked a similar question sufficiently.
Can I add a little bit to that, General?
Yeah.
So I'd like to also add a little bit more to that, because I've also been asked some of the questions, and I have spoken to victims, and I did hear the victims testify in the Purdue bankruptcy. There are all kinds of entities and people, individuals who have been impacted by the opioids epidemic. You all know this. The state has incurred costs, just as General Ford has explained some of those costs, in trying to abate this epidemic, and real cost in just what it incurred because of the epidemic. So have the local governments. And then you also have individuals who have their own costs that they've had to pay out for their own personal loved ones or families and friends, for services and programs as well. So the state actually is representing, and we're required by law, right, to represent the state agencies and therefore to make recoveries on behalf of the state, just like the counties are doing the same for the counties and the cities are doing the same for the cities. What we know is that some of these programs and services that are going to be funded by some of this money will actually help go down to individuals, but it doesn't actually utilize money to pay back individuals for any costs that they came out. And that makes sense because the programs and services are needed for abatement. Now, the actual settlement itself with the distributors and J&J included the MDL, which is the multi-district litigation that we've talked about. The multi-district litigation is where all of those private lawsuits, the class actions and any private lawsuit ended up. They got transferred to that court. So there is actually some, and I don't have the actual information, but there's some consideration being given to those private causes of actions, which is those individuals' costs. So there is some mechanism for a little bit of recovery as well. The other amounts go to the states, and then the states likewise to the counties. So does that make sense and help a little bit?
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay.
And then one more point, Lisa. So my office, we can sue Acme Corporation. I'm making up a name here, right? We can sue Acme Corporation for widgets that they sold that were defective. And we can do it with a multi-state action where every state and territory is involved in that lawsuit. And we can sue on behalf of our residents, and we can break down how many widgets were sold to Nevadans and which Nevadans purchased them. And that type of lawsuit, you can absolutely expect that we're going to receive money and give it to the individuals, right? That's not this lawsuit. This opioids lawsuit is one that relates to state damages, how much we had to expend as a state to assist individuals who were encumbered by the opioid crisis. Two different, qualitatively different types of lawsuits. And it's important that we understand this isn't us suing Acme Corporation over widgets. It's us suing opioid manufacturers and distributors over fraudulent practices that led to addiction, that led to our state having to spend money to address those in several different ways. So hopefully that's helpful as well as people continue to think about what this lawsuit's about, what these monies are intended to recover for, and how we need to be utilizing those, if that makes sense. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Any further questions right now? Oh,
Yes, sir. We have a question from Jessica Johnson.
Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Attorney General Ford and Mr. Kruger for your presentation today. I had a question about the One Nevada agreement. How do locals and counties know how much funding they're going to be receiving? I was a little confused on this slide when it came to net allocation. And that was all going to the Fund for Resilient Nevada. So, but my understanding is that the One Nevada piece is separate with that 33.8% amount, give or take. And so, can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, again, Mark Kruger again, for the record. I don't know that I've been doing that every time. I apologize, you guys. So hopefully you'll get my voice. So like this slide that's up on the screen now, there's an individual slide for every single one of the signatories to the One Nevada agreement, which represents exactly their portion that they will be receiving. We just haven't finalized those yet because I was waiting until the actual cost. I wanted to get something to you guys so you can visually see it for this presentation. But when I finalize all of the slides, it will be after the costs are paid out in the end of June, so that there will be a final deck charts that actually have actual dollar amounts, all calculated out based upon what we're receiving pursuant to the One Nevada agreement. So that'll make it a lot easier for everyone to know who's getting what.
But I'm making up a county. Acme County, pursuant to the One Nevada agreement, knows what percentage of recoveries they're going to get. That's in the agreement itself. What percent, and they know that they won't be getting that they will be getting that percentage after costs are taken out. Okay, so that's how they know how much they're going to get, and that agreement is on our website, and you can see what those percentages are based on the agreement.
Right.
Sorry, Jessica Johnson for the record. Thank you so much for that clarification. I have read through the agreement with the exhibit with the percentages, and I appreciate, Chief Kruger, your timeline for when those actual amounts might be available. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a question in Carson.
We have a question in Carson. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Eric Sherman for the record, I retract that Jessica just asked my question for me, and it sounds like the answer is Well, no, thank you, Jessica. That was brilliantly put. So it sounds like let's be patient, we'll wait, and you'll have the final slide deck with all the numbers later in June.
July.
It's July, okay. Yeah.
Thanks. Any further?
No further questions.
All right, Mark, go ahead.
That was the end of my slide deck. I think there was one last slide asking if there's any questions, but or here, end of July. Sorry, there was two more. But what I just answered was in my slide deck. There you go. So with that, I am concluded, and I apologize for taking up all of your time.
No,
I hope it was helpful.
Mark, I'm gonna stop you. This is an important conversation.
Yeah.
People want to know how this money's been spent. They want to know how we came about the arrangements that we're in, and that's fair. And we're transparent about it. We're not afraid of this. We are determined to bring home money to the state the most efficient way possible. And we're doing that. And I'm proud of that. So thank you for spending the time doing it. Thank you for asking all the questions that you have, and keep them coming. If after this presentation you have new questions, I'll bring Mark back. I can bring in outside counsel to answer questions if you have questions about that. There's nothing to hide here. We're all just trying to be certain that this committee can make good recommendations to the Resilient Committee, and we can get monies out to the people who need it and to the entities that need it to help people who need it the most.
Well, General Ford, you brought up good points, but the one point that you hit on, and I wanted to tell everyone here too, everyone in this state and in this committee and General Ford, you guys should be proud of this. That what we've accomplished to date is a lot of money coming into the state for abatement. Are we done yet? No, we're not done. We still have a lot of defendants left, and we're still moving forward with litigation. But hopefully we'll continue to bring in additional dollars. But yeah, General Ford, you should be proud.
Thank you. All right. Any further questions before we move on?
No more
Yes, go
questions.
ahead.
Joe Tolles, for the record, just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Kruger, for all of your work. Thanks for the detail. Thanks for that presentation. Thanks for answering questions and your dedication to this. We do appreciate it so much. I've always enjoyed our dialogues, always enjoyed working with you, and so appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Okay, if there aren't any further questions for Mr. Kruger, Mr. Kruger, you're welcome to stay, or you can bounce, whatever you want to do.
I'll stay a little bit. Why not?
Okay. Then why don't we move on then to the next agenda item number 5, review timeline and process for SURG meetings and recommendations. Chair Tolles, or Vice Chair Tolles, on you.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I know that we have an enormous task before us, and that, just like eating an elephant is one bite at a time, that is the goal. And so it was my hope that we put a structure in place that has benchmarks that we need to meet in order to get to the final deadline, which is our report with our recommendations by January 31st. And so this is the point in the process where we have 6 months roughly from this meeting to accomplish that first report. And so it's time to buckle our seatbelts. We have already done so much work, but this is really, particularly the next 3 months are going to be crucial in order to solicit the participation and the active engagement of all of you on this committee and in each of the subcommittees to be able to meet the next benchmark, which is September, and I'll walk through what each of the goals are here in a moment, in order to give our team enough time to be able to get final reports done by January 31st and ensure that we have the best recommendations that we can put forward. And so I'd like to walk through with you the expectations of our work as a working group, and I appreciate our chair Ford on the first day saying that this is a working group, that it is our goal to be working hard, and we have each one of you members here very, very specifically for a reason, because you are experts in each of your field, and we want to make sure that each and every one of you feel that your voice is being heard and incorporated into this work and the final product, so that it's something that this working group can feel proud of, and most importantly, that it actually accomplishes things. And so I want to speak to the process again of how we get there. And also just put it into the larger scope of the work of this committee across the state in terms of what the expectations are. First, let me point out that the legislation, the statute, dictates that this is an ongoing committee. So this is not going to be a one-year process where we only have a one chance at the ultimate recommendation list of all time. First of all, that wouldn't be very useful because this is an ever-evolving issue. We've already seen how this issue has impacted lives, as bearing witness by the testimony of members of this committee, myself included, who've been impacted. We also have seen how it has shifted and changed and sadly increased over the pandemic. And we've also seen that we have new challenges, as we've noticed with fentanyl and being increasingly prevalent in our communities and risking and taking lives. And so we are going to be an ongoing, this committee is going to be ongoing in the future. So one of the things that is the greatest benefit of that is that we will make this series of recommendations in January, but some of those recommendations will be to be continued to do the work, to do deep dives and evaluate how we can better coordinate between agencies, how we can better coordinate between state, local, and federal jurisdictions, how we can continue to research best practices and work on this. So I know there's been a little bit of anxiety over getting all of these recommendations over every single category all at one time by January, knowing that simultaneously we still have this needs assessment process that's working in conjunction that hasn't quite been finished yet. And so, so what we are doing as a committee is prioritizing. What are the best recommendations that we can bring forward from each of the subcommittees that will make up this first report that we'll be presenting in January. And so the timeline for that, if we could go back to the PowerPoint, I'm sorry for that lengthy introduction, but the timeline, just to put us back on the calendar of the calendar year, is again 6 months from today is when that report, or 6 months from this month is when that report will be due. And so to take us back a little bit, in March, at our last SURG meeting, we got an update on the needs assessment. It wasn't completed at that time. Then we established subcommittees in order to break this down into manageable pieces. And we established the leadership and the structure and the membership. Then those subcommittees, as you'll hear later in our meeting today, will report back on the meetings that they had in April and May to hear presentations from subject matter experts, and then begin the process of collecting recommendations from those experts and from members. And then today we're here to get an update on the opioid litigation, and thank you again, Mr. Kruger, for that and for the discussion, Chair Ford. And then we are going to get another update on the needs assessment. And then each of our subcommittee chairs are going to give a progress report on what information we've gathered so far and what initial recommendations that we have. Then for the next 2 months, our subcommittees are going to be working hard to hear from additional subject matter experts and then ensure that we've set priorities on what our top recommendations are as subcommittees, and to vet those, discuss them, and finalize them, and bring forward our best recommendations in our top priority categories to present to, if you could move to the next slide, to our September SURG committee, where each of those subcommittees will, I would love to have a competition with prizes for which subcommittee chair pulled off the best list of recommendations, but the reality is we all are going to bring forward our best, because we all want to make sure that together, as a whole working group, what we have to put forward to the state, the governor, the legislature, Department of Human Services, and all the various agencies is going to be our best work. And so in September is when all of those will be completed and presented to our working group as a whole, and then we get to have discussion debate, refine, reject, or accept and or amend and move forward. So then in October and November, if we have any more refinements we need to identify, we can. And then we'll come back together. The hope is in December as a committee to do one last round of finalizing. And the more work we do in September, the less we have to do in December. So keep that in mind. And then we can then hand that over to our excellent team of consultants and staff who will then put that final report together to be published and distributed in January. Does anyone have any questions in regards to how the work of this working group and these subcommittees will proceed in order to meet that goal?
Yeah, Assemblywoman, thank you so much for this. Question about the bill draft requests and the recommendations. So the timing of this, my recollection is that it may be too late for that unless we convince a legislator to use one of his or her bills to present the bill draft request. For example, my office, we get 20 bill draft requests and they're due in September. Now, what I'm happy to do, to the extent it falls within our jurisdiction to do it, maybe we can, Mark, we should check this, is I can put a placeholder in that is simply nondescript enough to where recommendations from this committee can be placed into a bill draft request. But short of that, I think December is too late to have finalized a bill draft request unless, you know, one of our participating assembly persons or senators is willing to reserve one of their own BDRs to accommodate that request. Or is my timeline off? Am I mistaken on this?
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're going to ask.
This is Assemblywoman Thomas talking.
Thank you
Yeah.
for the record. They're asking in August for us to have
okay.
drafts in.
Yeah. So here's what I think I'll do. Assemblywoman Toles, and Mark, double check this, but make certain that we can do this. I think we can. We'll put in a generic bill draft request that says pertaining to substance use and abuse or something like that. You know, and maybe we can try to get our details in to LCB, you know, in a sufficient amount of time to get things moving, as opposed to me having to ask you, Assemblywoman Thomas or Senator Donate, to agree to reserve one of yours because you probably have other things you're working on as well. Unless HHS, I don't know, do you get a bill draft request that you can use for this?
Stephanie Woodard for the record. Yes, we do.
Okay. Do you intend to utilize one of your bill draft requests for any BDR requests that this committee comes up with?
We certainly have the latitude to do so. Stephanie Woodard for the record. So if there's a recommendation that needs to be considered, we can certainly do that. We also have been presenting with the Interim Committee on Health, who that group is also very interested in what the SURG is able to identify as key potential legislative policies to move forward.
Okay. All right. I mean, that's great. I'm glad we have entities. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I appreciate the avenue through the AG's office, BDR, as well as through DHHS. I'd like to just clarify that per the statute, NRS 218D.150, that the first four legislative BDRs for the Assembly, and I believe it's true for the Senate as well, so the first chunk of BDRs are due by August 1st. However, there's a whole second allocation. So for the Assembly, it's 4 need to be turned in by August 1st. 5 are allowed before December 10th. And then there's one more that's available within the first week, which in this case, for the next legislative session, by the 8th day of session would be February 13th. So we actually, from a legislative standpoint, there are opportunities to still get BDRs in as late as February 13th for a final request. But the second tranche of BDRs are due December 10th. So we do have avenues. Although this is a committee that is under the AG's office. So I think, and with the work with the DHHS, I think that that's a perfectly appropriate place to put BDR placeholders for the bulk of the work, but I want to make sure it's clear to the working group that there are other avenues for additional legislative bills for perhaps maybe single subject issues or anything really that we have until December 10th for this to be submitted.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I just don't want to put our legislators on this committee on the spot right now to make them commit to utilize one of the BDRs for one of our requests. And that's the only point I'm making relative to the timeline here, is that my office doesn't get the luxury of waiting till February to file a second tranche of BDRs. And so I'm just trying to ensure that we have at least a placeholder. And we can go from there. I don't know if DHS has that ability. Look, I don't think we'll have a problem finding a legislator to do something, frankly, but I just don't want to put my legislators on this committee on the spot to require them to commit at this point because they may already have their stuff allocated. So that's one thing I was highlighting.
We have a question.
Thank you.
Lisa Lee.
Okay, a question from Ms. Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Attorney General Ford. Lisa Lee for the record. I do have a question regarding the intersection between this body, the SURG, and the ACORN. Is there sharing of information, or do the two intersect in any way as far as recommendations go?
So her question is there an overlap or communication? The answer is yes. I mean, we have folks who are serving on both or at least represented, attending both meetings, and the communications are going back and forth, but that's a generic answer. There may be others who want to answer more specifically, Dr. Kearns or Dr. Woodard.
Yeah.
So,
Dr. Woodard, did you want? Go ahead.
So Stephanie Woodard for the record. Thanks, Terry, and I'll pass it back to you because I'm sure between the two of us we'll make a complete answer. So we actually were very careful as we were drafting the legislation to make sure that there is an intersect. But as a reminder, right, the SURG is much more global in its direction, where the ACRN is really focused on providing recommendations to the Department of Health and Human Services on the allocation of funds specifically for the Fund for Resilient Nevada. So the SURG's charge is much more broad and global, but there is an opportunity for those two groups to communicate and share information. Actually, later on in the agenda today, you will be hearing about the updates that we have for the needs assessment and state plan, as well as some recommendations. So we're looking to create some synergy between these two groups so that each group really has an idea of what the other is doing. And then Terry, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say that I've attended all of the advisory committee meetings as well. And I know there have been members of that committee that discussion has gone on about various things. And they are listening in on our meetings and said, let's say the prevention subcommittee is addressing this. I suggest you go and look at the documents and listen to the subject matter expertise. So there is, it's been informal at this time. And I would throw this out, we could also have a joint meeting if that would help too, in terms of sharing of information and understanding what each is tasked with doing and what each is doing. Because I've often heard, as Dr. Woodard said, that the ACRN is looking at funding and the SURG is looking at policy, which is not true because we do look at both policy and funding of these from the SURG. So whereas as Dr. Woodard laid out, the ACRN is looking primarily at the funding issue. So, and the only other thing is that out of DHHS, it is their grants management unit that is going to be distributing the funds and not the ACRN or the SURG.
So Stephanie Woodard for the record, just to add to that, Terry. So it will be out of the director's office that the allocation of funds for the Fund for Resilient Nevada are determined. the ACRN makes recommendations to the Department of Health and Human Services to be taken into consideration, along with a number of other bodies that in the statute we are required to also consult for some of those additional recommendations. But similar to Terry, I have been attending both the SURG and the ACRN meetings. And between Terry and I really working to try and bridge the communication between these two groups to ensure that both are updated as to what is occurring in each group. Also to Terry's point, while the ACRN is primarily focused on making recommendations as it relates to funding, we are also capturing ideas and concepts for recommendations as it relates to policy, because more often than not, you can have a recommendation for funding, but if there's a policy issue that gets in the way, I would say that definition for paraphernalia last session was a great example of that, where we had to make some policy changes in order for us to get funding out into the community. We are paying attention and flagging those. And some of those recommendations I've actually also included in my recommendations to the SURG, so that we're really trying to make sure that we're capturing that information when it arises and making sure that it's communicated to the most appropriate body.
A quick question for clarification. This is Terry Kearns for the record. If, to your point, Dr. Woodard, if we have something where we're actually trying to amend prior legislation, that doesn't require a BDR. So if anyone wants to speak to that in terms of the process, because I think some recommendations might actually be amendments to prior legislation.
No, you need a BDR.
Okay.
Yeah, you need a BDR to
Okay.
amend legislation. Yeah. I mean, during the process, you can do amendments, but no, you need a BDR to amend it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Unless if y'all changed it in the last 3 years. Since I've been gone.
No. Yeah, I was just checking. I wasn't clear on that.
Assemblywoman Toles, anything further on this agenda item from you?
No, thank you so much.
Okay. All right, why don't we do this? We are at about an hour and a half. Let's come back at 10:30, an 8-minute break. We will come right back at 10:30, okay? See you in a little bit. We'll refill one. So one of the things that Assemblywoman Thomas and Assemblywoman Toles and Senator Donate and Senator Gunther would recognize is that Aaron Ford doesn't run on legislative time. We like to start quick and early and on time. So here we go. Thank you so much for coming back, y'all. Let's move on to the next agenda item. Senator Donate is going to be leading us, it looks like, in a conversation, an update from some subcommittees on prevention.
Here's some news about conversation.
Treatment and recovery and response. We have a conversation from Senator Donate, Assemblywoman Toles, and Assemblywoman Thomas. Senator Donate, mic's yours.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Ford, and good morning to all the committee members. For the record, Fabian Donate representing Senate District 10, and also the chair of the subcommittee on prevention. I want to start off really quickly just by recognizing a few of the members that serve on this subcommittee. Some of them have experiences of their own in this subject matter, and so it's been a pleasure getting a chance to work and hear their ideas. A lot of the policy recommendations and our presenters that we've received from our committee are from them and their due diligence of their work in the committee. So it's been a pleasure getting the chance to lead this group. I think it's on the next slide if you want to keep going. There you go. And next slide. So far what we've been able to do, the prevention subcommittee has met twice. We first met on April 25th, and that was to give an overview of what substance use treatment and recovery programs were in the state, and that was presented by Dr. Woodard. And then our second meeting was held on May 23rd, which essentially included presentations on preventing and understanding the risk factors by Dr. Grigsby from the UNLV Department of Social and Behavioral Health. And then we also had a presentation from Linda Lang and Jamie Ross from the Nevada Prevention Coalitions. And they were able to give us a few recommendations that have been submitted by subcommittee members on prevention itself in this subject space. Next. So in public health, we recognize that prevention is pretty complex, and the easiest way that a lot of us have broken it down into is into 3 subcategories, and those subcategories are primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. And that's essentially what we've structured our next meetings to discuss policy proposals. So primary prevention, what we have allocated for this particular subgroup is to focus on health education reform. There's been a lot of conversations as to what health literacy looks like for K through 20 education. How do we ensure that students and community members are equipped with the right knowledge as to how they can develop better and safer behaviors as they grow up? So health education reform is going to be top line for that conversation. And also we look, as we know, this is probably across public health in general in the state. We have challenges with reporting mechanisms and data infrastructure. And so we want to be able to cover the conversation of what do we need to do to help be better positioned to get grant funds, and how do we make sure that we invest in the infrastructure so that we don't continue, so that we're set in place to continue to receive more funds moving beyond what we learned today. With the secondary prevention, we're going to be focusing on screening and integration of behavioral health, and of course, payment mechanisms. There are a lot of good work programs out there in Nevada that already do work in secondary prevention. What we learned so far is that a lot of grant programs nationwide are geared towards primary prevention, but not as much is done in secondary. So that's an avenue for us to do some good innovative work. And then of course, tertiary prevention, which is terms that we've heard before, which is harm reduction, and then naloxone distribution. We have tailored our individual meetings to each of these focus groups, but considering what we've heard so far with the recommendations, the BDR recommendations that should be in place, we've considered changing the structure of them and prioritizing harm reduction to the front of that order. So hopefully by the time that we present next, we'll be able to bring forth more recommendations as to what comes forward from those conversations. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go over, considering that this is public information and this slide deck has been distributed to the committee members, I'm not going to go over all the policy recommendations that have been submitted. As you will see, a lot of them come from either our committee members or from the community themselves, and including policy experts that work either at the UNLV or the UNR schools of public health. And so you can see on these slide decks, on this slide deck, essentially some of the recommendations that we've hit so far. Next slide, please. And this is continuing the same thing. A lot of it focuses on workforce development, supporting or deterring social determinants of health. And then next slide, please. Childhood development is also something that most of these cover. And then, of course, making sure that we are increasing our training for folks that work in the clinical space and in the community at every level, not just statewide. Next slide, please. And even more recommendations. I think this one focuses more on the data collection, which I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. And these are additional recommendations that we received from presentations. As I mentioned, Dr. Woodard gave us a few initiatives based on what she felt, given her expertise. Next slide, please. And then we also received some from Dr. Grigsby. Next slide, please, which you can see right here. His work, Dr. Grigsby presented last meeting, and his work is in Latino youth. And so we've asked a lot of our presenters the same question, which is, it's the $1 million question. If you are given a budget to help support prevention in its entirety, to prevent substance use, what would you do? And these were the recommendations that Dr. Grigsby gave us. So we'll be doing the same for our following presenters as we go through this process, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And of course, we have the Prevention Coalition members on this call too, if you have any questions regarding their policy recommendations. But thank you again, AG Ford, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Senator Donate. Any questions for Senator Donate? Okay, hearing none, then we'll move on. Senatorwoman Thomas, you're up next.
And thank you, Chair AG. Good morning. As Chair of the Treatment and Recovery Subcommittee, I am pleased to report on our progress to date. And for the record, Assemblywoman Clark Thomas. Our members include a diverse group of subject matter experts, and we have been pleased to have good participation from the public on our subcommittees as well. Next slide, please. Our subcommittee has met twice since the last SURG meeting. On April 25th, we had presentations from Dr. Woodard and Dr. Kearns, and in May, we heard from Dr. Dixon on medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. Next slide, please. We have a number of presentations planned for subcommittee meetings this summer, and we'll hear from experts in a variety of areas, as we can see from this slide. Next slide, please. Individual members have been provided with recommendations from presentations to the Interim Committee on Health in both February and March. In addition to those recommendations, they have offered their own recommendations. I asked members to review the recommendations we have compiled to date, and prior to this meeting, they each independently ranked their preliminary top 5 recommendations. We will continue to add recommendations and rank them moving forward, but wanted to see where there were consensus among members on preliminary priorities. Here you see the top 5 recommendations reviewed individually to date. 3 of the recommendations are around increasing access to medication-assisted treatment. 1 is to engage people with lived experience in program design, and 1 relates to providing linkages to care, referrals, and follow-up for special populations. If there are any questions about the way the recommendations were prioritized and weighted, Laura Hale can answer these questions. She compiled the results for us. Next slide, please. Other recommendations are listed here around workforce, addressing children and youth treatment and recovery services, promoting parity in behavioral health coverage using the hub and spoke model. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see recommendations again related to workforce and strengthening the treatment and recovery supports for youth, including those in the child welfare system. The final weighted recommendation to date focused on strategies to prevent and treat Black, Indigenous, and people of color at risk for fatal overdoses, and working to expand certifications to increase the workforce for treatment and recovery. Next slide, please. We have also received recommendations from presentations to date as seen here. Next slide, please. A number of recommendations were made specifically for youth mental health crisis services and treatment. Our committee looks forward to hearing more presentations and bringing forth our top recommendations at the next SURG meeting in September. Any questions?
Any question for the Assemblywoman? Okay, thank you so much. So, any questions? All right, great. Thank you so much. We'll move on to the response subcommittee. Vice Chair Tolles.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank the 2 other subcommittee chairs for your work. It's exciting to start to see those recommendations surface and seeing the more complete picture of the work of this group. I'm so proud. As far as our subcommittee is concerned, I've been really grateful for the input of members as well as our subject matter experts. We have an amazing group, as you can see there, with a broad variety of expertise. And we've had 2 meetings, one in April, one in May, similar to the other subcommittees, where we've heard from subject matter experts. Our first meeting, April 11th, was to also get an overview of our treatment and recovery programs from Dr. Stephanie Woodard, and then the overview of the work of the Sentencing Commission, Nevada Department of Sentencing Policy, from our Executive Director, Victoria Gonzalez, and to get an idea of what other recommendations have already begun to surface. And then in May 9th, we had presentations from law enforcement agencies in regards to what kinds of issues we're seeing both in arrests as well as in our housing facilities, and what are some preliminary recommendations to address those concerns, as well as all the great work that is being done currently statewide. So if we can move to the next slide. We have additional presentations planned for July and August. Part of our work as a response subcommittee is to take a look at how our local jurisdictions are responding to substance use issues. And so we're going to be hearing from city and county representatives and other programs that work in conjunction on innovative programs, discussing the economic impacts and impacts on public health. And then in August, we have some specific issues we wanted to do a deep dive on, families involved or at risk in regards to the child welfare system, knowing that that was a critical need that we've talked about in past meetings, and then the conflict specifically between the Good Samaritan and drug-induced homicide laws, and then finalizing our recommendations for our September SURG meeting, just like the other subcommittees. So we plan on spending a bulk of our time on discussion and refinement. I'd like to just take a moment to remind all the members and all of the subcommittees that we have the ability to look at those recommendations on the Excel spreadsheets, that we are submitting the recommendations along with our justification and any links to resources or other evidence-based programs, sample legislation. There's a section in there, we covered this last time, to put your comments. So members, I want to remind all of us to be reviewing the recommendations so far and to be submitting our comments and then sending that back to our SEI consultant teams. That will make those subcommittee meetings much more efficient in terms of discussion. So that we will have had a chance to read each other's preliminary comments, identify any questions or concerns, and be prepared to make those finalization of those recommendations in those subcommittee meetings in the most efficient way possible. So I just want to remind us all to do that homework in between so that we can get through all we need to get through in those subcommittee meetings. Next slide, please. So similarly, I won't go into detail on these recommendations because these are just rough draft form that have been submitted. They have not been discussed, vetted, amended, rejected, or accepted. But you'll see that we are considering recommendations from other committees, including the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services that includes 24 recommendations. We want to make sure we're not doing too much crossover, and then the Department of Sentencing Policy and those recommendations, and then also the HIDA, the Nevada High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas presentation included recommendations as well. So we are going to be taking a look at if it's already been covered in one of these other groups, and we will just add our voices to support those recommendations. I want to make sure that we're collaborating, not competing. We can move to the next slide, please. So as you can see, most of our recommendations have been submitted by the other recommendations by our members. Dr. Payson has submitted a number of recommendations. I'd like to point out just one in particular in regards to adjusting penalties for trafficking weight of fentanyl. In our presentation, we had a very enlightening slide, and you can view it on the working group's webpage where we post all of our agendas for all of the subcommittees and all the presentations we've heard. So that's open and transparent to the public. But one discussion that was particularly pertinent, so you'll see us come back to this, is in regards to the weights in our current statute and the penalties. We found that according to our current statute, in regards to the weights of fentanyl and the penalties that we assign to them, that our lowest level deferral is anything up to 14 grams, and that has the potential to kill 6,995 people. Anything between 14 and 28, which is considered 1 to 4 years, has the potential to kill 13,995 people. 28 grams to 42 grams is 1 to 10 years currently, potential to kill almost 21,000 people, and 42 grams to 100 grams only gets 2 to 15 years. That has the potential to kill 50,000 people. So I just want to let our whole working group be aware of some of that information and what we're looking at in terms of the data that will be driving our recommendations. We could go to the next slide.
Well, Senatorwoman Toles, on the penalties for trafficking weights of fentanyl, are you all contemplating particular suggestions on how to adjust the penalties?
Yes, we are. So you'll see that fourth recommendation right there is to adjust the penalties for trafficking weights. And again, we haven't made the final recommendation decisions. We'll be discussing if it's appropriate to make adjustments based on that kind of information that we've received in our subcommittee.
I think we have a question here.
A question from Assemblywoman Thomas. Does that require NRS a BDR to amend?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
yeah, it will. And I've heard this request from several entities, law enforcement, non-law enforcement. And so I'm very interested in what recommendations you all have relative to how to adjust the penalties down. So looking forward to that recommendation.
Thank you so much. And so the next slide, please. You'll see we have additional recommendations from our member, Shayla Holmes, in regards to everything from our crisis outreach response teams to the availability of naloxone, which is why I appreciate that we're doing this overview today so we can see what other subcommittees are looking at. In fact, I'd like to request from our consultants that are aiding us in this to help us identify if we see the same recommendation or something in regards to the same topic between the subcommittees, to notify the chairs of each subcommittee to flag that for us, and then perhaps allow us to coordinate to make sure that we don't have competing or duplicative recommendations before our September meeting. And then next slide, please. We have some additional recommendations, again, from Shayla Holmes and in regards to our response. And then I believe that's the last slide in regards to an overview of our recommendations. If you go to the next slide, please. That's the overview of the recommendations so far. Again, you will see those refined and prioritized and submitted by our September meeting. And I look forward to seeing what everybody comes up with.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Any questions for Chairwoman, Vice Chair Toles? Okay. I just want to reiterate what Assemblywoman Toles said a minute ago. These subcommittees are very busy. You guys are doing some great work. It's a lot of work. And I got to give kudos to my colleague, Dr. Kearns, who've been everywhere. Thank you so much for helping out. And Dr. Woodard, I don't know where y'all found the time. I mean, you're everywhere, doing everything. And so thank y'all for this hard work, and appreciate everyone for the work you're putting in. All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is a review of the statewide needs assessment for the Advisory Committee for Resilient Nevada. And we will have Dr. Cantrell. Please take the mic.
Hi, thank you. So for the record, I'm Dr. Courtney Cantrell, and I'm here to talk a little bit about our progress with the needs assessment, in particular about the gaps that we've identified so far, and the scoring methodology that we've come up with to score and rate some of the recommendations that we have put forth, or that we're going to have in the report. So again, I'm going to go over the report overview. The structure has changed since we talked last time. Some summaries of identified gaps is the bulk of the presentation. And then again, I'm going to go over that scoring methodology that we've developed specifically for Nevada. Okay. Next slide, please. Thanks. All right. So when it comes to, well, actually, I'm sorry, go to the previous slide. It was some kind of delay. All right, so we had a slightly different section layout last time I talked to you guys. Right now we have what we're doing now is section 1 is a background, section 2 is the methodology of how we've created the needs assessment, how we've done some scoring. Section 3 goes through the opioid impact in Nevada, and that one is much more about the statistics and the breakdowns of who really is impacted, who is using opioids, who is overdosing, what other drugs are involved in the overdoses, the availability of opioids and other drugs, the impact on behavioral health and on physical health, those kinds of things. Section 4 of our report now goes through the current system addressing opioids. So we talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, harm reduction, the various treatment places where opioids are treated in Nevada, as well as recovery and social determinants of health. And then we end the report with recommendations. When it comes to the current system addressing opioids, we kind of reorganized the report after presenting it to the ACORN committee in a way that I think makes a little bit more sense as you walk through it. For every one of these sections, we of course have sections of gaps. And so that's what I'm going to go through next is the gaps that are in the same order as they appear in the report for the most part. So next slide, please. So the first thing we talk about in the report is data. So the first thing I'm going to present here is the gaps in data that we'd identified. Now I want to also note that these aren't necessarily all the gaps we found, and just because something is a gap doesn't mean it just doesn't exist. In some cases, it's a matter of degree. Maybe it exists only in Las Vegas and Reno, but it needs to be promoted in other places too. So gaps are kind of defined as things where we've identified some level of need, but not things that are missing completely. So we did, though, identify some limited or lacking data in a number of places. In some cases, your PDMP, it has some robust tools, but there are some additional things that we think it could do, some reporting that actually includes some demographic information to help better identify those people in need of some intervention, maybe on a geographical basis or a cultural basis, who really needs that outreach when it comes to the data on prescription monitoring. Pregnant women and opioid use, there's not a ton of data out there on pregnant women. It's really actually a hard thing to do within data to identify who's pregnant from data. But where there are opportunities, there probably needs to be some focused efforts in that. Of course, health outcomes in substance use services is also a really big area that a lot of states struggle with, but Nevada as well could use some more efforts towards ensuring that what those health outcomes are for people who are being treated for opioid use disorder. So then you would have a better idea of then, what treatments are working and in which ones are not. Specific substances involved in suicides, because there are a lot of intentional overdoses as well. So it's good to know what all the substances are that might be involved in those. And then some additional information on people who are using opioids, such as their comorbid physical disorders or their co-occurring mental health disorders at the same time. The second column shows we would really love to see some more detailed breakdowns and data reports that address race and ethnicity, housing status, veteran status, pregnancy status, LGBTQ plus status, and any immigration status. Now, a lot of these are incredibly hard data to pull because a lot of times they're not part of the input of the process. But just flagging those for the state to consider to start to try and find ways of incorporating this kind of data into your reporting so that we can can better identify health disparities and better address those and tailor efforts towards addressing those kinds of the disparities that can be identified when you have the data, or when you have more data reports. So another section in the report is prevention. And specifically, I'm going to talk here about public education and stigma. There's a lot of county level public education going on, and especially in schools. Could always use more. The statistics that we're seeing from some of the national surveys is showing that although you have good stuff going on, we need more because kids are still reporting high and early use of substances, including prescription opioids. And so we need to make more headway in decreasing that. So there's already a partial implementation of the Zero Suicide Initiative. So one of the recommendations you'll see is a fuller implementation of all those aspects of the Zero Suicide Initiative, which is a kind of a federal program or model that incorporates, from prevention all the way through aftercare for suicide, and that is a part of opioid use when people intentionally overdose. So as I said, school-based prevention programs, prescription drug disposal is needed in certain areas, but seems to be pretty robust in others. Education on treatment options for those, especially for those without housing, and especially for people in rural areas. A lot of people in some surveys just didn't quite understand what options there were out there and what treatment means. Education, again, among high school students, and even around how to talk with their healthcare provider about pain and pain management and prescriptions and drugs and things like that. And then finally, there are some gaps in that there are a lot of people still reporting stigma, of course, who have lived experience. They have difficulty obtaining and keeping housing and keeping jobs. They have a lot of anxiety over seeking help, especially when it comes to veterans, tribal members, and frankly, people in rural areas who are in small towns. And there's a lot more stigma in some of those areas because everybody knows everybody else pretty well. So next slide, please. So there's also a side of prevention that is more about the provider and prescriber education. So some of the gaps we identified there were, although there is education of patients by prescribers on pain management, sometimes that's only in pockets or certain providers, or people get busy. So we identified a real need for more of that and more of education around expectations of pain, because when people have chronic pain or surgery, they might desire that pain just be taken away by medicine. And sometimes the expectation needs to be that there is some amount of pain you're going to experience, and here are some other ways to cope with it. Utilization and referral to other pain management options like physical therapy, chiropractor, things like that. There are a lot of people who had reported negative attitudes from healthcare providers. So if someone maybe goes in the emergency room for a health condition, but they're known to have used opioids in the past and had some problems with that, with misuse and dependence, then sometimes the attitude from a healthcare provider can be pretty negative and can distract from the actual health condition that they may be coming in with. Increasing something called Project ECHO, and that's the project extension for community health outcomes. That is a really wonderful way to get very busy doctors more information and more understanding and more competency in dealing with some of the pain management issues and opioid prescribing. So next, please. So when it comes to treatment, we have lots of treatment gaps we identified, as every state has a lot of treatment gaps, and we only have so many resources to go around. But and we saw some general treatment care gaps, one of which is, of course, an insufficient healthcare workforce. Healthcare is not immune to some of the workforce issues going on right now, but frankly, it wasn't great before the pandemic. So still struggling with getting enough providers in there to serve all the people that need it. And that is especially true in rural areas. National data does suggest that there are significant disparities across treatment areas for ethnic and minority youth. But again, there's not Nevada-specific data that we could draw on. So a lot of this is that we don't know what the impact is or what the disparities might be specifically for Nevada. There's peer support is wonderful, and yet it's missing through the entire treatment continuum. It would be great to have it throughout the entire treatment continuum. There's a need for more community-based and accessible resources after release from the criminal justice system. There are very few there are there are a lack of providers that are certified for treating co-occurring disorders, especially for youth. So that means that when a youth comes in, they both have high anxiety and an opioid use disorder, a provider might not be fully trained or certified in really how to deal with both at the same time. So they might tackle one, when in truth, it's one person and those things are interacting with each other and feeding off of each other. So there's definitely a need for providers to be more comfortable with and do more evidence-based treatment of co-occurring disorders, because you can hit them both at once and really get some headway on some of the issues people are dealing with. Screening, identification, and referral to treatment, that often happens in primary care clinics outside of the behavioral health specialty system. And we identified more of a need for that based on some very low numbers of claims in Medicaid that are showing that there's not enough of that screening, identification, and referral happening to get people into treatment. So the teal box, when it comes to outpatient treatment gaps, as you guys, I'm sure in the work you've been doing, especially in your subcommittees, have identified, we do need Nevada does need more MAT. We need more opioid treatment programs, which are those programs that often give methadone, and they are the ones dedicated for doing, for offering methadone and other treatment modalities within one clinic. OBOT is another that is office-based opioid treatment, and that one is more about maybe your primary care physicians who are willing to see a certain number of patients who they can give buprenorphine to, and hopefully, have the person referred to some therapy at the same time. So it's two different kinds of treatment programs, but both very, very important for increasing access to medication-assisted treatment, especially in rural areas, and they are needed. Again, in rural areas and on reservations, we've noticed the mental health treatment during and after MAT is also important. And while the needs assessment is focused on opioid use disorders, there's such a strong relationship between mental health disorders and substance use disorders that you're more likely to find them together than you are to find somebody who just has a pure substance use disorder or a pure mental health disorder, which is why it's important to include mental health treatment in the consideration of alleviating some of what's happened with the opioid epidemic. And then formal collaborative care for individuals at risk for suicide. That's another particular outpatient treatment gap. There are evidence-based practices within that Zero Suicide Initiative that really talk to that collaborative care where you have multiple people involved in caring for someone who has at a high risk for suicide, and therefore could also end up being a fatal intended overdose. So next slide, please. Withdrawal management, inpatient and residential are kind of a higher level of treatment services that we kind of set apart. People that had actually done some surveys, and the information that we have on Nevada suggests that community support during detox is lacking, but is necessary. There's also a need for more short-term and long-term rehabilitation beds. And I will say, I don't think it's on here, but especially, yeah, it's the next one, especially, what's not the, I'm sorry, especially for youth. There is a real lack of a dispersion of these treatment facilities available for youth. And that, again, that's pretty common in a lot of states. But given the number of kids who are getting exposed to opioids, there really is a need for more of those treatment facilities for kids, because you don't want them mixed in with adults. That's not appropriate, and the treatment is going to be different. Again, these are also offered mostly in urban areas, and they're lacking in rural areas, which really causes a transportation issue for those, especially who are in the frontier parts of the state and need to go to treatment. All right, and then the crisis system. Nevada is working hard right now on 988, on mobile crisis, on crisis stabilization units, and on zero suicide. But we still felt it was important to put that this is a gap. It's being worked on, but it's still a gap to have those mobile crisis outside of central Las Vegas, to have crisis stabilization units that can really help people rather than sending them to the emergency department. And then the really importance of following up after crisis to ensure that there's a stability and that they're addressing barriers to care. Again, it doesn't mean that's not happening. I know we've talked with the MCRT and the care teams, those child service agencies that do mobile crisis for kids. They do wonderful follow-up. So we need more of that and more consistency in that across the state. Okay, next slide, please. Excuse me, I have to cough again. I'm sorry. All right. And finally, well, not finally, next to finally, are discharge and recovery support gaps. So in addition to treatment, we've got to take care of people once they finish treatment and go out into the community. And that's when things are the most risky. And that's the most sensitive period for people who have just finished treatment, is when they leave. People have identified that there needs to be more funding or insurance for long-term care and recovery and residential programs, things where people just need longer and they need to live sober for a while before they, until they can really feel like they can get out in the community independently and on their own. There is some surveys show that people with experience in this area have found inadequate discharge planning. There's not enough communication, not coordination and communication between levels of care. So the person receiving treatment might go from one provider and kind of finish up with that and then move to a lower level of care, but then have to tell the story over again, have to kind of start over at each place. So we would love to see some efforts in coordinating and communicating between those levels of care a little bit better. Again, that release from the justice system, both for adults and for kids, can be really rough, and having more programs that help people ease into the community. As you probably know, a lot of overdoses happen when someone did have an opioid use disorder before they went to jail or prison. They go to jail or prison and might be off of it for a while. Then when they go back out to the community and released, they might meet up with old friends, they get exposed to the opioid again, and their tolerance has gone down. So they end up overdosing because they don't realize that they couldn't take as much as they did before they went into the justice system. So education on that and supports around keeping people, out of the opioids once they're discharged is a little bit lacking. 12-step groups in rural areas. There are some, but there are not enough to cover the need. Things like educational support, parenting support, health insurance, education about recovery and what it takes to maintain recovery, as well as recovery centers in the communities were also identified as gaps. Okay. Thank you. So, and then finally, is harm reduction and social determinants of health. So harm reduction, of course, is important in saving lives. When people are still using, we still at least want to give them enough chances at life so that they can get into recovery in the future. And then the social determinants of health. So that has to do with housing, transportation, food, safety, all kinds of things that a lot of us take for granted, but that greatly affect healthcare and health outcomes. So, and it also affects recovery. It's really hard to recover when you leave wherever you had gone into treatment and you don't have a home and you don't have food. That makes it so much harder. So when it comes to harm reduction, you have needle exchanges, some really neat and innovative ones with vending machines, but more are needed, especially in rural areas. It was reported that there's some limited hours availability for some of the programs, that they'd like to see more hours of availability on those. They mentioned wanting more education on harm reduction resources and methods, like how to use naloxone on a friend. And some people would love to be able to access harm reduction in rural areas without other people knowing about their use. So if you have a very small town and you've got a needle exchange, the person walking up for that needle exchange could be seen by people driving by, or maybe a local police officer driving by, and they're not real comfortable going to those kinds of things because they are not anonymous, because it's, a lot of these places are small towns, and so people know who you are. When it comes to social determinants, of course, housing vouchers, affordable housing would be wonderful. Transportation, employment, internet access, food access, all these things were listed as gaps, at least somewhere. And some, of course, if you're in Las Vegas or Reno, you probably have a lot more transportation than you have if you're in those outlying and frontier areas. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so those were all the gaps so far. It's not all the gaps, but it's a taste of the gaps that we identified through the needs assessment. What we did at Mercer is we brainstormed recommendations that could fill various gaps of those and kind of kept them a little bit broad. We came up with over 90 recommendations, and we're still working with ACORN and with the state to kind of refine and add the various recommendations that also should be included in the report. But what we did is, in order to have a more objective way of prioritizing those recommendations, we came up with a scoring methodology. The scoring methodology rates each recommendation based on its impact, its urgency, its feasibility, and then whether or not it's one of those 3 legislative targets. So when it comes to impact, we rated each one from 1 to 5 on overall impact by looking at the number of lives that are affected by the recommendation, the magnitude of that recommendation on an individual's life, and then the impact the impact the recommendation would have on health quality, health equity. We looked at urgency. And by that, we looked at the availability of alternatives. So it's not urgent if there are a lot of other alternatives right now that people could use, but it becomes a recommendation could become very urgent if there's nothing else like it to fill that gap and that need in the community. We also looked at consequences of a delay in the implementation. So not getting the lock zone out, that costs lives. Maybe there's some other kind of lower urgency ones that if you don't do it today, nobody's going to die. Now, people might suffer in the future, or maybe transportation's one. Treatment's going to be delayed, so there are longer term effects. But we looked at urgency in that way. We looked at feasibility, meaning is there current infrastructure? How easy is it to implement this recommendation? And what is the current availability of resources for the implementation? Is it cheap and quick and one time and we can get it done easily? If so, it goes a lot higher in priority. And then finally, as we mentioned, we weighted the score up a bit if it hits one of the legislative targets mentioned in Senate Bill 390. So those 3 targets were overdose prevention, addressing disparities in access to healthcare, and prevention of substance use among youth. So we're going to make it so that these recommendations can be sorted by any of those factors as well as the total score. And then they're also categorized by allowable expenditure categories that are in the legislation, which are also recommended expenditure categories and on a Johns Hopkins guide for the expenditure of these kinds of funds. So I'm going to give this presentation, just this part of it, tomorrow to Acorn. And I'm also going to go deeper in the scoring methodology, and then I'm going to show the 90 recommendations and go through kind of how they can be sorted. And we're going to look at the top ones that come out and see what additions the Acorn Committee has to add to that as part of their work. So the next step after this, the needs assessment, we're still refining that. We're working really closely with the state to make sure it's nice and comprehensive. It's over 90 pages right now, so it's a pretty big one. But we're working on getting that done, finished up within the next few weeks. The recommendations, these 90 recommendations or so, it's going to be appended to that. It's going to be a part of that report. But then the statewide plan is also going to have those recommendations prioritized with additional elements that the state can talk about a little bit more. So what I was going to say is if anybody wants to join the Acorn Committee tomorrow, you'll hear more about the specific recommendations that we brainstormed a bit. And I think that completes my presentation.
Thanks so much, Doctor. Any questions for Dr. Cantrell? Very thorough report.
I see one from Lisa Lee.
All right, Ms. Lee.
Dr. Cantrell, Lisa Lee for the record, thank you so much. It's exciting to see how this has progressed. You mentioned one of the gaps being the inadequate data on pregnant women with opioid use disorder. I'm wondering, I haven't played around with PEDS data, the treatment episode data set. They have admissions and discharge data, and I'm looking at the code book. And they do collect that, but unfortunately it's going to collect pregnancy status at admission or discharge. So for people that are enrolled, say in MOUD, a medication for opioid use disorder, within like an OTP, an opioid treatment program, and they're there for several years, it may not capture every single one because they may not be pregnant at admission or discharge, but it might help for those shorter treatment durations. Mm-hmm. And they do collect a ton of other factors that were also listed as gaps. Mm-hmm. They do not collect sexual orientation data, mm-hmm. but as far as the other sociodemographics, including age of first use, the medication they might be on, and then any kind of co-occurring disorder. If they have a DSM diagnosis, that would be captured as well. And I also wanted to mention, I did not see on your list, and perhaps it's included elsewhere, But one thing that has just been the bane of my existence for many, many years is working with families who have very little options as far as family-friendly treatment centers and recovery residences. So from the very, very few that we have to choose from, it's typically a female identifying mother and child or children, not necessarily an inclusive space for all pregnant and birthing persons, as well as partners. So partners have to go elsewhere, and it becomes a nightmare, especially if there's child welfare involvement, where you have one partner here with child or children and another partner is here, say in a men's program, and then they're just recovering separately, and then you join them back up on a reunification plan, and it doesn't always go well. And so I think this is a huge gap, and I don't know if others can speak from the rural point of view or from the Clark County perspective, but certainly in Washoe County, this is a huge gap. If we're going to talk about treatment and recovery for families and really disrupting those intergenerational cycles, we really, really need to talk about family-friendly recovery environments. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions? Yeah, Assemblywoman Thomas.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Thomas, for the record. Just a quick question, Doctor. The 988 rollout, how is that going for the state of Nevada? I've heard that other entities are experiencing a backlog.
Can I defer to Dr. Woodard if she's on?
Sure. Good afternoon, Stephanie Woodard for the record. So there's a lot of answer to that question, so I'll try to keep it brief. 988 in Nevada, we've already had a statewide crisis call center for many years. So when we convert from the 10-digit telephone number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline to the 3-digit 988, we already have a very well-established statewide crisis call center. We have been funding them over the last year with some additional dollars, including some additional federal grant funds that we just received in April. So we've been able to supplement their current staffing in addition to some additional federal funds that they've received by upwards of 50 additional staff that will be able to take calls and provide follow-up and case management. And then in addition to that, we are working to finalize an RFP to go to procurement to be able to identify a statewide program that will not only be able to take over a more robust call center function, but also then provide what we call crisis care hub. And that crisis care hub will also allow us to see pretty transparently where the availability of services are within the crisis system. Also be able to deploy mobile crisis teams and ensure that we have adequate access to crisis stabilization. So from the call center perspective, we feel relatively well prepared and being able to bolster the staffing necessary for crisis support services of Nevada while we continue to build out the entire crisis continuum of care.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Terry Kearns for the record. I was in a meeting yesterday and we were talking about some different programs, and the question comes up, and you hit on it, Dr. Cantrell, about readiness, I guess, or acceptability within different communities. And I'll give the example of the syringe services and the vending machines that may work well in Vegas and in Reno, but it might not as well. So is that factored in for all of these different programs? You know, because one community may be ready for it, but then other community that's similar may not be ready for that. Or even looking at the bridge programs and the prescribing of medication for opioid use disorder in our emergency rooms. And, you know, it's there, they know about it, but are they ready for it? Thank you.
Courtney Cantrell for the record. It's not factored in a way that these are 30,000 foot. They're not 100,000 foot recommendations like increase MAT or increase harm reduction. They are slightly more specific, but not specific to regions or counties. I would say that it gives you enough flexibility to figure out where you need to implement those programs. So a lot of the recommendations kind of imply that if you've already got it here, then we need to find ways to do it in these other places. And then don't forget about that other part of the counties being able to then apply for funds, because hopefully they can read these, access the same reports that we did, and be able to see where their county lies. And so some potential options for them to use the funding locally to make some progress in those areas through their coalitions. Or, yeah.
Any further questions? Okay, Dr. Cantrell, thank you so much for the presentation. All right, we will move on to the next agenda item. Assemblywoman Tolles is going to go through the review and consider items for the September 22nd, 2022 SURG meeting. Chair Tolles, Vice Chair Tolles.
Thank you so much, Chair Ford. And I'll just harken back to the timeline that we discussed in a previous agenda item, that the goal for that September SURG committee, the primary purpose of that will be to discuss and take possible action on subcommittee recommendations. And so I anticipate that we will want to leave as much time as possible to be able to go through each subcommittee's recommendations, to have discussion, to take possible action on whether or not to accept each recommendation as is, to amend it, or to take a vote, and if it doesn't reach the majority, then to reject that recommendation for the time being. Now, that doesn't mean, knowing that this is an ongoing working group, that it can't come up in the next year's report after there might be some further vetting or changes made, but that will be the bulk of our time. And I anticipate that will be a lengthy process to go through each one of those and consider them, and hopefully refine them down to being at our best first rough draft by the end. But I'll open it up for comments, questions, and then recommendations of anything else that you think that we need to put on the agenda for September 22nd.
Madam Vice Chair, I should note I may not be at the meeting on the 22nd, so I may have to defer to you to chair the meeting. I'll keep you posted on that front, though.
Thank you. Is there?
So you got quiet on me.
Question.
What was that?
Have we set that in stone, September 22nd, or is it possible to revisit the date?
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's not set in stone yet. We're looking at, okay, we'll circle back on the actual date, but if it is 22nd, I may not be able to make it. We'll see.
Okay.
Any comments on the agenda? I'm sorry,
yes,
go ahead.
We'll just say from now on, we'll say for our September meeting, and we'll make sure that we can have a date that works.
Okay. Okay. We see nothing coming up online, and we have nothing here either. Okay, I guess we will circle up in between meetings and figure this part out. But thank you so much, Chair Tolles, Vice Chair Tolles, and we will circle back on this issue. We'll move on to the next agenda item, public comment. Do we have anyone here in Vegas for public comment? Yes, ma'am. Come on up and introduce yourself and state your name for the record, please. Or, yeah, you should come up here because you probably need to be able to hear.
Rhonda Fairchild. For the record, I'm with Behavioral Health Group. And I just want to thank all the subcommittees for all of their hard work. I've been sitting in on a few of them, and I really appreciate the time and consideration that's put into each topic. And I want to thank the Attorney General's office for their transparency and having everything available online. It makes it easier for me to go in and read when I can't attend. And then I have a question, so I'm just going to state it as not a question. So grants end in September. September 29th is usually the last day of the grant year, and then we start over in October. So would this funding be available for 2022, 23, or are we looking at 23, 24? That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Public comment, we're not able to answer questions per se, but your question's been asked, so to speak, and maybe someone offline can, have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for your public comment. Any further public comment here? What about in Carson or Reno?
No, Chair, we have no members of the public present.
Okay. Anything online?
No, sir.
And we have nothing online. Okay, then we will close public comment, and I will say thank you so much for everybody for attending today. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Laura, anything you need?
No, I was just hanging out to see if anybody else needed anything. So we started out with so much discussion around the funding that I was worried that it was going to really run long, but the other stuff went pretty quickly. So it was good.
Good.